For our closing dialogue, some of our speakers today will join us for further exchange on the unique power of design. We once again invite Ms. Garett Hwang from UN Studio Hong Kong, Mr. Clint Nagata from Blink Design Group, and Ms. L.J. Kim from District Stage. Joining this panel is Professor Daan van Eijk, Chair Professor Industrial Design, Delft University of Technology in the Netherlands. Welcome, Professor. To moderate this closing dialogue, we have Mr. Darren Chakri, founder and managing director of Hong Kong Initiative with us. HK Initiative is a company dedicated to harnessing global talent and technology to drive brand innovation, and Mr. Chakri also serves as the chair of Brand Tech Asia. We would also love to thank Ming Foundation for presenting this dialogue. We appreciate their generosity in supporting KODW. Let's welcome our panel for the last session of the day.
Great. Well, welcome everybody. It's been an incredible day. We've talked a lot about different topics. And as we look back at the original theme of today, the power of design, I want to kick off and just talk about the transformative capability that design has to reshape society, reshape and redefine our future. And we've got incredible masters from all different walks sitting here together. And I think the most important thing is, as a roundtable, how do we start communicating together, right? We have architects, we have industrial design, education, storytelling, interactive media, luxury design. How do we bring it all together? And let's start off with, I want to reshape the question of design. What's your each definition of design? Clint.
For me, design is, well, I guess for what I do, design is really about solving problems. And I think Garett said it earlier, right?
I was going to say.
You stole her line already?
I went first. But I agree. It's like the more problems I have, or the more the box I have, I think it's easier to figure out a way out of the box, rather than just being given this open freedom.
Okay.
So sorry for stealing your answer, but
It's okay. Think of something else now.
Solving problems. LJ?
Well, it's been changing for me though, so I don't have a firm definition of it, but for now I would say it's communication. So design is the ability to communicate with others, like us now. We are from different fields, but we could communicate. I could say that is design.
Okay.
Yeah.
Communication?
In addition to the problem solving, I would say it's experience defining, really. It is which is kind of related to both. It's how do we interact with everything around us, actually. It's all encompassing. So, that'd be my short answer.
I know you have a sharp answer.
No, but for me, I think it's also more focused in the things we're doing is really about innovation. So I think design should always have a new component, or what's new for that specific context. And of course, it's communicating, interacting, etc. But so that's also more than, of course, just shape, but that's mentioned many times today. And of course, the connotation of design is quite broad, but for me, it's always related to innovation.
So we have this, but what's the role now that design should be playing across all of these companies, across all of these industries? You know, and I think a little bit on design, we look at it and going, okay, it's part of the process. It's communications, it's solving problems. But I think these are new definitions of design compared to what the traditional idea of design is. So how do we need to incorporate design into, like you said, you started at the users designing your building, right? Mm-hmm. So do we have to completely break down everything and say design has to become this different type of role to be successful, to bring everybody together, to help solve the problems?
Do you think that, I'm going to question your question, because I almost feel like it's the reverse, that what doesn't incorporate design, why are they not designing? Because I almost feel like when everything you see around, there's a conscious decision, where there are conscious decisions on how it was made, how it's to be used, what it looks like, etc. Right? And to me, that is already design. And design started before as to why it was created in the first place, right? And that's the problem-solving element. So I kind of feel like if people are saying something doesn't incorporate design, you start to wonder, then how was it created in the first place? And why?
No, I think there's a lot of products made or environments made. You can still argue that why is this made? So I think there's another, would say, context also. When you look at the subtitle of this conference, it's the power of design, but of course you can use the power in many different ways. It is about, let's say, circular world, or let's say sustainable development goals. So it's also kind of, yeah, problem is solving problem, but also problems in that context. So how can we be part of that or contribute to that?
But if you take circularity as an example, you know, innovating for circularity is one of the themes as well. But circularity is a massive subject. And if you look at all the sustainability, say, great, all the companies are starting to build in chief sustainability officer and these other ones. But is design in there? Or is it more technical infrastructure on a lot of these things, like LED buildings, right? Or at the very beginning, are we saying design has to be the most important role right from the beginning of this process?
Yeah, I was actually having lunch with Edmund today. We were talking about something at his workplace. Is Edmund here? But he was saying, and I guess it's true even with my company, if you separate the project managers from the designers, they both wear different hats. And it's only when you put them together that that tension really gets to a point where you come up with a new solution. Because the project, I guess the left brain, right brain, you have different ways of looking at a problem, so they arrive at different possibilities on their own. But when you put them together, then that's the only time it's the best time for them to sort of hear each other out and to come up with a solution that works best, that neither of them thought about in the beginning.
And how does that play out? Like,
Yeah,
you're in the technical,
Yeah,
right? So
I was thinking by listening what you guys are talking about. For me, I'm not from like a tradition. I mean, I don't know what's the really traditional definition of the design though. But I think when we start a new project, for example, I can just apply examples how it works. So you started to find like to solve problems, you needed to able to find it. So you started to think like boundaries, and then you started to think from there and plan what you wanted to do, and that I could say it is design process. And then from there, all the stages are planned. And now I say like for me like planning is like design. I'm not sure if it is good answer. For your question though, yeah.
Well,
You could
so-
rephrase the questions
I
as
mean,
well.
I think
yeah.
it's interesting, and it says solving problems, right? Communication, solving problems. These are new ideas in my world of design. Designers were sketching, beautiful, creative illustrators, moving into that, and it's shocking now to see that we've turned it upside down.
Right, because I think for nowadays, what's the problem? I mean, finding it is kind of the first thing to make something innovative. I mean, for my case, so.
Finding the problem.
Yeah.
You said you started when you were designing the building, right? That you had to start with other users. So wouldn't that also be a big part of design? Is understanding the customer, being able to figure out all of the elements that are even needed to be able to even start design?
Yeah, I mean, I have a hard time separating roles in the process of design. So, and maybe it's the way we work. You know, we don't have project managers, we don't have a technical staff, and then designers. Everyone's a designer. Because if you don't consider, if you're doing, you know, client coordination, decisions that you make impact the project. The project is the design. Every single question that you, right, you know, where a vent is located, that will impact the design because you need to think about that in the design. And so maybe that's why I have a hard time separating this. You know, there's a design process, of course, and collecting the parameters or the factors that you need to consider, or your constraints, your conditions, that's all part of the process. And that's part of this woven, the input, output, you know, the information loop that you need to develop a design. And so that's why I kind of see that those, I mean, there might be bad design. There might be people that didn't consider design well, but they, even in their decision not to quote unquote design, they made a decision then that was their design. That's why it's a bit hard for me to say that design doesn't exist anywhere, that there's a situation that it doesn't exist because it either they just didn't spend much time on it or
they're bad at it.
yeah, they're bad at it. You know, the solution was bad, but design is always actually a part of everything. It's funny if you look at the most, you know, I was laughing the other day because I was looking at a razor blade and it was completely over-designed. And I'm sure no one even looks at this thing like how much effort they put into this razor blade, but someone spent a lot of time on that thing.
Sure.
Yeah, so that's why I think even they say, you know, like architects only work on like 1% of the world's buildings, right? That doesn't necessarily mean that there weren't people designing the other buildings. They might not be called formally architects, but you know they were designed, and so that's why I have a hard time separating or segregating what's part of it.
So you're turning design into a core part of the process.
It is I think it's part of the process. I think it's part of everything that we do. I think that the power of design comes from how we, you know, for our awareness of this and for us to then acknowledge that the impact that we have, and then how do we translate that into to apply that to all the other factors we have to consider. And I think that's why whenever you look at something, maybe instead of starting small and going big, I tend to you look at the big picture and you consider everything, and then you figure out how do you incorporate all this to find that one elegant solution. And that's the problem-solving part. Right? It's always finding, when you have this beautiful birdie there, it might have started with 6 colors and 10 legs, but it got to a point, and that was the winner. So,
Dan, let's bring the human component into this now, and it's design. Lost on a trail, we've got technology, we got this and that. Where does human empathy coming at the beginning of this as well, and circularity, sustainability, inclusivity? How also do we have to start at this and connect these?
Yeah, I think the human always been there, in kind of be one product for one person. But I think nowadays, many more projects, especially more complex projects, and also let's say the society as a whole, is much more about different products, environments, kind of communicate with different groups of users. So the user is broader, and I think even, and that was one of the presentations this morning, you can say there's a designer, there's a client, there's maybe a company, there's maybe, let's say, local governments, the user, society, but also almost the environment is also an important stakeholder. So it's not a user, but is it really designing for users, specific users? Is it for humanity? Is broader? And you can even say, is it for all life on the planet? So that's even a step further. Let's say beyond human design.
So it's bringing it to a very large scope. I want to bring it back down. Let's bring it personal.
Yeah.
Let's bring it to reality. A few key things. What was the key thing that you heard today or saw in one of the presentations that was your aha? Wow, it was very interesting.
I think a few things that I heard repeated that I latched on to was about placemaking, and I think throughout the morning I'd heard several speakers talk about that, and I was fascinated by how it's sort of looked at from each of the different speakers' perspectives. But it sort of echoed throughout the morning. So it's something that I think is probably a relevant point that as designers we think about subconsciously first, I think probably.
It's about that experience, right?
Yeah, it's about creating experiences in the end, right? I mean, we do interiors or an architecture and resorts, and but it's really about creating an experience for the guest, not necessarily creating interiors. I mean, it's the same, but it's different.
Placemaking. So
yeah, I actually found your presentation session was interesting, especially the podium of the building.
The discussion of the podium.
Right. because we are dealing with more like digital media and immersive media, that means that you could really imagine anything. Like you could and create anything. Yeah, we do like a virtual, I mean, you could draw anything and then you can projection on the walls or on the different shapes. We design all the things, but it was, podium part was very functional. At the same time, it's very sturdy structure, and how you approach and how you evaluate the kind of heights to work with the whole environment was very impressive for me today.
So what do you walk away with going back tomorrow to Japan? You know, any of your projects, what's that one thing that then you will use?
Well, I didn't talk about this project, but we are also preparing one like a new project. Really, we start with a whole new building. For that, so far we approached it like the way how to make this kind of a container for our contents in the best way. But now I can see I could think about the around the environment and the container. Like I say, black cube, which is our art piece, how it work with outdoor environment and the circulation system and all the structures outside. Maybe I could consider height as well of the box.
I mean, there's something very interesting, because I feel like we're usually when you're designing a podium, right? Especially if it's a commercial podium, right? And especially in China, you have the large big box. So half of the facade then is solid, so that and that's where then you're pulled in to activate this solid. While I'm dealing with the transparent and the showroom, the windows. So do you generally then, and sorry, I'm asking a question. Do you generally find then that people come to you and say like this is the resultant area that you're supposed to use to activate, or do they come to you first and then the architect is kind of reacting to the space that you're given?
So you mean for
if you have like a podium, you're a commercial
like
podium.
a commercial podium.
Yeah.
The question was that if we first consider the
do you have a situation where the client comes to you first before the facade is even designed?
Oh yeah, of course, yeah.
And then they say, okay, this is your.
So we are having more and more projects, like they have some idea that, because they already saw our project, so the client or the urban developers or some like real estate people, they have a big picture of the site. They are thinking to make this as something, say school or shopping mall or some government building, whatever. And because they now saw our project already, the proposer sometimes they ask us if we are willing to go there, and then if we are willing to, then their room to adjust the space for us. So, for example, Art Museum, we need to have a certain height. So if the building doesn't have that height, we could not install our project effectively. Right. So sometimes we need certain heights to install this piece. Then sometimes, if it's a new building, they built like the room with enough height. And sometimes they just remove one floor to make it, so merge two floors to make the heights. Those things are happen. And even for like this new project is from our side, from our company. That one we are doing a lot of different ideations. And the podium story today was kind of making me to think about this kind of surround of that building we are thinking.
I think we have to rethink everything. As we started off the morning, is it good design or bad design? And we've had consumers, and it's about a mindset change. And even if you're looking at the presentations today and the different ones, the new definition of hospitality, what you showed us what luxury was before, luxury hospitality, where are we moving in with luxury design? The buildings that you've shown around the world, we've incorporated this greenery, biophilic design, changing this, so that our spaces become livable. Our environments are also changing from there was a good question on developers, right? Do we just put up a building and do it? Versus when you're creating Googles or their headquarters, you're starting at the very beginning of the users. So what has to change now? How do we communicate, or how do we bring everybody together? collectively around that because it's different worlds. You have these beautiful nature type style livings, and then on the flip side, we got LEDs everywhere. We have AR. Are we turning into the fifth element, or are we going back to nature and human connection? So how do you see the world going now?
Can I speak?
Yeah?
Yeah, of course, that's a quite difficult question. But I was, come back to your earlier question and the presentation I saw of Direct. Really, I mean, I've seen a lot of world exhibitions, so big immersive environments, and so bring that in the city. So I was really asking myself, I really liked it, so the technology, the perfect thing of it, but you can also use that for very different things. There's a lot of commercials, sometimes you were using the sound or not the sound, but when you're in a city, I can really see when it's kind of quiet, it's kind of nature in the city. On the other hand, when you think about other use with a lot of noise, can be visual pollution in a city. So it's a kind of love and hate relationship to this kind of things. People are a lot of in their screens, and then you're kind of in a screen in the city. So for myself, I saw really these two sides of it.
I think actually that it's funny because it's something that we've actually been thinking a lot about recently. As I mentioned before, because there's always this theme about ecotech. Everyone's talking about sustainability, but then everyone's talking also about future technology. And in an architectural space, this is why I find it very interesting what you're working on, because you're creating you're able to distort dimension in a 2D plane, and we're creating this in a 3D environment. And often we have to figure out, this would have been actually this. We come to a conclusion. This would be really interesting if actually we could incorporate a digital installation that allowed us to distort the reality any further. Because the physical environment, you can play with proportion and materiality. There's all sorts of things you can do, but the dimension, the digital side allows you to go so much further. And so we're constantly looking at, we're questioning right now ways in which these two can really come together to push the experience so much further. I mean, you talk about, like whatever, 3 dimensions and fourth and fifth, and kind of the environmental factors that you play. And so going back to your idea, we're talking about like communicating between design disciplines. It would be good that because in an experience that I've had, which are more commercial, less of the, when they have an art installation that they designed for, it's very much a phased situation where the digital, what goes in is already defined based on kind of what the constraints are in an environment, right? If they need to hide, structure, MEP, or so, so that's already placed. But, if you have these two working together, I feel like there's so much more potential to what kind of spaces and experience we can create in commercial environments, in cultural environments.
Do you bring that
exciting.
in? Like, how do you bring in this technology into your designs?
I tried, but the problem is that I don't know much about it. So, I think it's so new to me, at least, that try to merge technology. What you do is quite new.
I think there are a lot of deviation, like architecture studio and design, like a design company, and like us, like design technology and work with art content. And so far, I think there was not that much program we could work collectively from the beginning. No. So, like some project you may already experience, like you have a certain stage, you already designed what to do, and then you meet other disciplinary to discuss like later. But like you mentioned, if we knew each other from the beginning, and if we could draw something together from the beginning, maybe we could experiment farther than what we meet later. So maybe we could, this program, like this conference is really important because we could meet like this now. And then
but you design these, right? Like when I look at all of your designs, they're so serene, beautiful, this, that. Do you want technology?
Actually, the last project I showed, which was the most zen or quiet of the wall, actually has the most technology. There is a wall in that space that is animated digitally, and it's supposed to be nature, but we couldn't figure out what to do. I didn't meet her till today, so we can discuss that later. But But the opportunity's there. But I think there's never been a forum to put this together, or maybe there's no patron that understands or appreciates digital art and understands how to involve it from the beginning at the start of a project.
I think there was an interesting point earlier today. They also talked about technology should be invisible. And if you're successful, you've made it invisible. Pull it up when you need it, when you don't. And I think this is the exciting part, even moving into these certain hotels. All of a sudden, if I need this, great, boom. Whether it's a hologram, whether it's a nature wall that all of a sudden turns into an interactive screen. I think we have the capabilities now to start, hiding the tech, especially where before it was hard. Tech is,
we're gonna be
energy problems,
more and
a
more
lot of the other
invisible.
one.
Yeah.
And if you think about the screen we are watching all the time, it's already merged all the different contents, like photos and illustration, moving image, sounds, and text. Everything is merged into the screen. And if we think about design, for now, we still have some deviations. What we are doing, of course, we have a different professionality. But for the future, as a long-term plan, maybe we should discuss more, and we should have more, some program to share insight and ideas, not in front of a project. Maybe we could see what's the future together.
Garett, even in your discussion, right? We had education, research showing this, and then obviously at the beginning, that's a different type of process, design process, right?
Then research. Research process.
And even now, you could easily just focus on your building, or do we have to look at the community? Do we have to really, how do we start driving this across government, across policy, across the client, across the end users, right? Do we not have to take a different, more responsibility as the industry to help drive this?
Well, I think that's the holistic view you were talking about. Mm-hmm. And of course, that's not always the need, when it's quite clear where it is, what location, etc. But when you have the more complex situations, I think you really have to start quite broad and then see. And I think that's the power of design, to envision what could be the future, when it's big. And I think then it's not only the physical shape or the digital shape, but also what kind of organization, how are people working, living there, what kind of life do they have?
I think that the nice aspect is that, especially for governments that are open to seeing, what the ideas are, what the potential is. You have in the design process, you have a lot of opportunities. It could be even from the beginning of doing a pitch for a government plot that hasn't even been sold, to you have government meetings. You might be part of a jury. You might be part of a panel to really give insight, because very oftentimes the government, they want to do something, they just don't know how to get from point A to point B. And that's where the power of design comes in, right? That we provide, we've done this, we study it, we provide ideas. We do a lot of these kinds of research, especially in the Netherlands. We work with governments for master planning and kind of goals of zones, and looking at the potential. And I think that's where then, where we can influence more, because it does take policy. The entire discussion about the podium, it's a very theoretical topic, obviously, how it was presented in research, which is how it should be. Getting to the reality of it, there's so many, everything from in Hong Kong, you can already, everything from, actually user access, BD restrictions on GFA calculation based on a lifted podium, getting exemptions for it. Program on a bridge, some Beijing, like Shanghai, they don't allow that. There's so many different factors you have to suddenly consider. And can you, it's something that Hong Kong should consider, because Hong Kong is great because it breaks the vertical barrier. You can have commercial program lifted up because they're used to having commercial program all the way up a tower. Most places do not have that. European cities, if it's not on the ground, if you put it on the 36th floor, no one's going to go there. And so that's why there's a lot of different aspects, but you start small, you get the ideas out there, builds up, and you get it to the right people, and suddenly, Flowers bloom.
The tidal wave comes in.
Yeah.
I mean, that's even saying the wind flow, right? How important and critical that is to the city and the livability of the city was interesting. Saying, and I think the future designs that we've seen from all of the architectural firms is how do we make this livable space? We can put the offices and the other parts about it, but this first part of this, we have to make it all livable. And mixed use, right?
Yeah. I mean, in Hong Kong, what's great is, I mean, it's a very standard situation. I mean, parking is our big, right? I mean, everyone's used to...
We have parking in Hong Kong?
We have parking. Oh, yeah, sorry. You have residential towers with, 4 floors of parking right there. They have to make a solid facade, covered in green, right? I mean, why are we not trying to find a way to activate that, through other program types so that you can then make use of the ground floor, you can lift up a podium. It doesn't take away, because the problem with a lifted podium is what's in the tower on that floor. Also, right, obviously can't be residential below then once you have a lifted podium, so you have the issue of daylight. And so why are we not then finding ways to take advantage of the car parking floor and trying to add program to activate that? And that's something that's very specific to Hong Kong, So I guess what it comes down to is innovation, looking at what the needs are, and then how can the solution benefit, provide more airflow in Hong Kong. Because Hong Kong's problem with Hong Kong is, right, didn't have the original master plan, so there is no, it never considered airflow, and it's so stuffy here.
Or even the water levels as well that she showed on her map, right?
Yeah.
That this is changing.
Right.
So how do we spark the conversation? What do we do when we leave here, and you're saying design has to be across everything. It's no longer just a designer, it's a process. It's something that we have to build in across all departments, across all projects, right? So what advice do you give, taking away from this, leaving this conference, that you would change, next week, next month, next year? How do you bring that into your work better?
I mean, for me, it's about it's always been about meeting people, and I know that when I meet people, I've always met some amazing people with some interesting ideas that have sparked the way I look at things to be quite different. But definitely, knowing what she does and that technology is very interesting to me. But I think it's just about each of us doing our part in terms of sharing what we've learned even with my team, my colleagues, and sort of build upon it that way, build momentum that way.
Circularity?
No, not only. I think that's an important theme. What's everywhere, but I think the way of working really connect to what you're saying is go. You have your silos. Maybe you have your platform, but maybe you have to look at this platform in a different way. And I think therefore this type of events are great, where you have all different type of people, and that's still in the design community. But I think it's also good to really meet with other type of people and really this kind of co-creation. And focus how you can do that, depending on what is your assignment.
This is part of the problem, silos.
Yeah, but it's not.
How do we break these silos or shift the mindset?
I think we can. Of course, we can propose that, but we can also actively ourselves meet other people. Because everybody's busy, but you can take time and think and discuss. And I think even broader than this audience here.
Architects, a lot of times they come into it in the beginning process, but then they finish it and they move on to the next project. Is this still the type of way of working, or is this something that has to shift as well, that you have to be involved longer across this?
Across a project? In my opinion, I know in Hong Kong they have this tendency here to think that design is about 3 months at the very beginning, and then suddenly it doesn't exist anymore. And I find that very weird. To me, design is done when the building's finished. And it's not because you're changing the design, it's because if you can't do a detail or you can't check the contractor's shop drawings without making sure that design is achieved, that's the entire process. I do think, though, that to break the silos, and it's to work with the client, to bring in the consultants, very early on. Sustainability consultants or even facade consultants, they tend to be brought in at a certain stage. The interior design, right, starts at, whatever DD or based on different projects, right? It's to bring them on earlier. And that's maybe for commercial projects. If I have a project that they have they're going to do an installation in the middle. That is an isolated element. The architect and the installation designer are not working together at all. And so I think that's where if we can work together with our clients to explain how the process needs to be more in parallel with all the different disciplines, I think that would also help.
But I would say that it's a much longer process, because now you say it stops when the building is finished, or let's say the product is finished or whatever, but I think then it only starts, because then people start using the thing. So when you're talking about, to come back to circularity, the whole use phase, it can be quite long for a building, but there's renovations, all kind of things. So in fact, I think we have to take much more responsibility for what's happening.
I was going to challenge that as well when we say, where does the design stop? Yeah. And I think different cultures have that different perspective as well, different cities, global ones, and this and that. And here we are certain parts of that. And I was going to challenge even after, isn't the biggest part of the design process once you finish the building? Now, how do I bring it to life? How do I create the experience, still work with the experiences of unlocking everything that I've built, right? Because that's where it changes. And I think, and you see the reactions, you're able to change the ideas that you had, and especially in a longevity perspective, I think it's important that design is there, especially once we open, and how do we bring it back to the people? How are people using it?
I think in that respect, then yes, because it's usually there's like the handover period, right, or the 1 year period or so that they actually still stay on, like they keep the architect involved. But it is you design for the long run, and you hope that it would be great if then you did that kind of post analysis, post user, that service, where the architect can still take part in the lifetime of the project. It doesn't exist really that much now. Clients might go back, but
How do you bring these people together? Differing silos, education, government, whatever. What's been your success on bringing different groups together and being successful?
For me, I think because we are working with more like the soft part than the hard physical structures often, the culture of doing collaboration needed to be more pervasive. So far it's kind of hard to have architect from the beginning, because it involves like a budget and schedule, etc., etc. But I think once we aware how it is important to collaborate together, maybe we could have that culture. Hopefully, we set up much longer timeline, and we appreciate this type of discussions each other to create better project. So that culture maybe will be more pervasive later. But for now, I understand it's kind of hard, and the reasons and the situations.
And Clint, you work closely, you said, with a lot of the owners, which is different than the users versus the operators. How do you set the tone? And you want to sell this idea, this creative, brilliant idea.
I like to plant seeds along the way. So from the initial meeting, in sort of side conversations I'll have with each of them, and try to see if we've got some sort of alignment. But also, I think that's always a good opportunity to bring in new ideas that are not the norm at this point. But I think, unfortunately, our profession, or the design profession in general, has been in silos. And it's going to take a lot of work to change that mindset, so we're all able to come to the table together more often. We have some projects that start off great. They've, at the beginning, we've got our consultants, everyone's on board.
But the CFO steps in.
Until he steps in and cuts the budget.
Where's this budget line?
It takes a special client to understand that to do something special, you've got to have the right cards, right? And you can't just play from the same deck you played last year.
Do you see it different across different parts of the world? how we might have to do a different process here in Asia versus Netherlands?
I think it's a good question for you, because you work in both.
I would say the process is different. It's funny. The problems are different, but the goals are the same, if that makes any sense. It's very weird that sometimes you find similar issues or processes on two different parts of the world, just totally by chance, because solving a problem is a formula, but who you involve and when changes. And I think also with each project, I mean, you don't even have to go across the world. You can be in the same country, and you have to work with, whether it's various associations, various government entities, bring it back to Lyric. When I first came to Hong Kong, I had to learn what all the acronyms meant in the city. There's quite a few, and how people are involved in reviewing the process and the design process. So it does vary. But it's equally important.
I think it's back to people, right? And I think it was interesting because the last session, they were designing Google in Tokyo. And she said one of the biggest lessons that she learned is that you got different groups. You have the young kids, and at Google, they created 20% of them had to come in, and you had to present to the young kids in hoodies and whatever this was versus the bosses, the C-levels. And he goes, and we had to change how we communicated, depending upon who we were communicating to. And at the heart, it wasn't the same design, it wasn't the same process, but how we brought each of the different groups, multi-generation across, was also the most fascinating thing to me, because you're right, we don't take that into consideration enough. And I think because everyone has their perspective, and we've got multi-generational issues on all of these buildings now, especially in societies that are aging, that we have to respect. But it was an interesting comment that they made.
I feel like we see that in our own offices. You have the more senior designers with the younger designers. They come from completely different generations, different expectations, different relationship with digital tools, and so. And I think it's important to have a diversity, I think, in your team, because they bring different types of knowledge, soft and hard, and so it is very important. But it's very interesting about how you, going back to design and communication, because how do you communicate a design for the different audiences? And it can be very different, and it's the exact same design, and it's very interesting.
Johnny and Sean. One's sketches, one's got in 3D, a whole different perspective. And I think that's the exciting part about it is co-creation, how we sit down in the beginning, lay it out, take the human first, put that on the line, and then move forward. So with that, I want to thank everybody for joining us. It's been an exciting conversation. And most importantly, I challenge everybody here to also talk to the person, at the break and the different other areas, and somebody that you might not even have anything in common with. And you'll be surprised what you have in common, right? Well, thank you.
Thank you.